Hi, Year 12. Here's a bonus lesson to complement our studies with independent learning. As we talked about last lesson, this is to give us the maximum amount of time to work on our individual IOs, get some feedback from me on that, and just make sure you've got plenty of time to plan, go through any issues that you might have. Just make sure that you're really, really comfortable going into the real thing. So today we're going to be looking at the man I killed. It's a very powerful text, I think, and it might help if you read the subsequent text as well or short story, I should say, because it does give a little bit more contextual information about the man I killed. So that might help you to understand it in a little bit more detail. The man I killed is the focus of the title itself is actually quite interesting. The narrative focus is on the enemy soldier and the enemy soldier's life, rather than what we might think, which is about O'Brien's reaction and what he went through. The focus is very much shifted onto the victim of his attack. So, of course, we need to think about the significance of this, but think about the significance of the life that was lost as well. War affects both sides. It's very easy to look at war from a one-sided perspective, and O'Brien doesn't do that. He doesn't demonize the enemy. What's more, he actually imagines him in a very, very positive light as a studious young person who didn't want to go to war. Is that simply guilt? I don't think so. I think it's an attempt to understand that people that were involved in the fighting could have been just like him. And I think it's an attempt to empathise and understand the humanity that's there in a place where people were habitually dehumanised. There's no short stories about atrocities and war crimes that were committed during the Vietnam War on both sides. Title is short, it's abrupt, it suggests a finality and a focus that's appropriate for the content. So the first task is I'd like you to draw the man I killed. I mean, you could just label a sort of stick image. It doesn't have to be a beautiful work of art or anything. But think about the connotations of these images that are being described. We've got a star-shaped hole as well, which is a link to perhaps communism. We've got the femininity of his description, which is at odds with, the villainous description of the enemy that we might normally come across. And yeah, there's lots of nice details there that you can pick out, and lots of connotations you can think about with that initial description. Again, very, very powerful. The initial description of the body contains no narrative. It's simply descriptive. The tone is quite objective and factual, but detailed and vivid. So you don't have to do the annotation again. If you've done the annotation, you can add that to your illustration. It's depicted as delicate, slim, young, with feminine features, almost dainty, shaped fingers, thin, arched eyebrows. Why are those particularly effective to think about and to focus on? What's the impact of this description? A butterfly sits on the dead body. What are the connotations of that? What ironic contrast does it create? Of course, think about the connotation of the butterfly, about beauty, about fragility and life. Note that O'Brien removes his own actions from the death of the enemy soldier. It was his wound that killed him. In other words, it wasn't him. He's trying to remove himself, put himself some distance between what he sees in front of him and his own causality. Note that there's no narrative commentary on O'Brien's action. We can only infer what O'Brien is feeling. He's not confessional in tone. He focuses, as I said at the beginning, very much on the individual. It's proof of his guilt by hiding from the event, or is it part of the acceptance? Is he actually highlighting the potential imagined life of this man? Of course, he never actually knew him, but he's imagining his life and his interests and what he liked. As a way to perhaps humanize him. So is it about hiding or is it about acceptance? Interesting question. The life of an enemy soldier. All right, so what's the purpose of a biography? Why do people write them? Or why do people read them? O'Brien provides a biography for his soldier. But why does he do this? All right, what's the purpose in doing so? Look at the initial description of his life on page 119. How would you describe the character that O'Brien creates? He's frightened, did not want to go to war, intelligent, passionate student, and the subject that O'Brien imagines him loving is mathematics. Why do you think O'Brien imagines the enemy's life in this way? All right, and I've already made comments on that, so that should be fairly straightforward. Oh, sorry. How does the language of the narrator juxtapose with the language of Azar? So at night, lying on his mat, he could not picture himself doing the brave things his father had done, or his uncles, or the heroes of the stories. This is very much like On the Rainy River, isn't it? He hoped in his heart that he would never be tested. He hoped the Americans would go away. Soon, he hoped. He kept hoping and hoping, always, even when he was asleep. And then we've got this quote from Azar. Now, it contains swear words, obviously. Now, can you say these? Do you have to sort of shorten them or anything? The answer is no. In your IO, if you do come across, it's a good point to make out. If there is a swear word or an offensive word or image or anything, just treat it with maturity. It's more important to explain why that particular language is used, what effect it has. Just analyze it like you would. It's all language, okay? From an analytical point of view, there's no good or bad language. There's just language that has effects and the choices that are made by the author. That probably is common sense to you, but I think it's just important to say it. So think about what that contrast in characters tells us about how the dehumanization of the enemy is so common in war. We've got an interesting structural elements here. The biography begins with the same long initial paragraph. It's a stream of thought as it were, just following the ideas and thoughts of O'Brien. It transitions seamlessly from the description of the enemy soldier's body to his imagined biography in a sentence. This structural feature imitates O'Brien's shifting thought from the dead body to imagining what his life might have been like, the man and life behind the body. It also shows O'Brien's struggle to come to terms with what he's done. The short story relies upon frequent repetition, returning to the detailed image of the deceased, almost like a sort of PTSD thing, really. It indicates the significance of the event for O'Brien, and he continues to understand and accept the consequences of his actions. It's as though the image haunts him, and he returns to it again and again, because obviously that's something that he struggles to get out of his mind. Also note that despite a roughly chronological structure, the short story meanders and diverts from its path frequently. It shows the chaos, confusion, and shock. So again, if you're being asked to talk about the whole piece and the whole story above the level of just what you've picked out for your extract in your IO, these are sorts of things that you can comment on. All right, how does the whole structure of the piece work in terms of relating to your global issue? All right, so this might help you give you some pointers on how to do that. Also, a few quick examples of contrasts, juxtapositions. You can normally find some form of contrast or juxtaposition if you want to make some easy points about structure. They often highlight and emphasize the horror of war, the senselessness and suddenness of death, which is a very prevalent theme in the things they carried. We saw that early on with Ted Lavender, didn't we? The description of the beautiful bell-shaped knelling flowers, good example of this technique as well. All right. Details of an imagined life. The imagined biography of the enemy soldier's life is told across 3 increasingly developed and detailed sections. To be clear about the narrative that O'Brien forms, create a timeline of the imagined life. Okay, you don't have to do that, but if you want to do that, you can if you particularly want to look at this text for your IO. Okay, the enemy soldier had been violent and dangerous communist, and then his death or O'Brien's actions could be seen as easily justifiable. However, O'Brien deliberately imagines him as explicitly not a communist, weak and scared, a pacifist who wanted no place in the war, very much like O'Brien himself, someone that he imagines he could actually empathise and have a lot in common with. In this sense, the biography is kind of a worst-case scenario. Imagine the person you killed is just like you. It's someone that's very innocent in that respect. And that exaggerates O'Brien's feelings of guilt, which stands in a great contrast to Keogh's summary of the event. The guy wasn't hiding, he had a weapon, right? So Keogh there is attempting to be very pragmatic and practical, just to try and obviously help O'Brien. This is war. If you hadn't killed him, he'd have killed you. But that doesn't really get to the root of the justification of taking someone else's life, does it? So, Keogh is trying to help him out there, but, this is it's a very, very difficult situation for O'Brien. Obviously, he's depicted as falling in love and getting married. The butterfly leaves, symbolically foreshadowing his death, and the story is filled with specific details such as dates, which shows the depth to which O'Brien imagines this person's life and how much it means to him. Again, we're going to spend a little less time on the Hitchens text because it should be very, very straightforward to us by now. You might want to start by paxing the texts before you have a look at it. Obviously, we know that Hitchens is right-wing leaning. The title is Soldiers Know Britain Lost 700,000 Poets, Teachers, Inventors and Fathers. And again, there are areas of similarity that, he bemoans the people that have died, but he's very much in the realm of glorifying soldiers and what they went through and what they sacrificed. Whereas O'Brien sees it is much more cynical and senseless loss of life. And I question how much sort of empathy Hitchens might have, for the enemy soldier, which we see with O'Brien. So although there are on the surface ostensible similarities between the two texts, the ideology underneath them, which we've seen many times before throughout looking at these comparisons, are very different. So what's Peter grumpy about today? Okay, so there he is. He's this grumpy face there sliding in. Modern people aren't emotionally connected to dead soldiers. Britain is intangibly less than it was. Government interference, loss of personal freedom. He likes to drop that in, doesn't he? He misses old empires and colonialism, Germans and the EU. Britain doesn't value its army like it's used to, which is quite similar to the first one, but he's talking about it on a larger scale. Maybe worried that the government might start a war. Again, structurally, it's kind of all over the place. We know he does this. We've said this many times, that he starts on quite a particular topic and then kind of just rants about lots of different kind of quasi-related issues. So I'd like you to find a quote for each one, and then just to practice our language skills, I'd like to identify a technique that he uses. Okay, I'm going to share all the texts, all the text and the PowerPoint with you, so everything's there that you need. If we can, have this done for Wednesday, if anyone's got a particular issue with that deadline, just drop me an email. But that's just to finish off that last text, and then we can crack on with the IO. And hopefully, you guys are feeling comfortable with your choices that you're making for that. So again, if I've had a few emails this week, if you've got any questions or concerns, or not too sure about how something might work, or want help phrasing something, obviously I can't write it for you, but I can give you some feedback and some pointers. Okay. All the best. I will see you soon, and you'll get to listen to my IO next. So, a bit nervous about that one, but I'm sure it'll be brilliant. All right. I'll see you guys later. Take care. Bye-bye.